for Operation Christmas Child, I think we packaged over 540 something boxes to send.
Wow, that's awesome.
To send overseas to, and our little church pumps out so many boxes, it's unreal. But Miss Monica leads this operation every single year. And although she doesn't like the spotlight and doesn't like the attention, I called her out because I thought it was important that people know that this lady who has been coming to our church for quite some time, picked up this project as her own, doesn't look for anything in return, is by far one of our greatest sidekicks as a congregation.
Yeah, that's awesome. So many lesser recognized people in the local church that really make the whole thing go, whether it's from scraping the snow off the sidewalk to making the communion bread to photocopying the bulletins to replacing the light bulbs in the sanctuary. It takes a whole crew of people, but not everybody can be in charge, and that's okay. That's a good thing.
Right, but what's snow?
Oh, yeah, well, I would know now.
Yeah, you're living up in the northern area. You done left the south.
That's right, man. That's right.
I think the only thing I'll be shoveling is water away from my back door. But all right, now let's get to the meat and potatoes. So from what we read in this chapter and in the book of Acts, what differences were there between Silas and Barnabas?
Okay, so that's a great question. And I referenced this a little bit earlier that Paul had a number of sidekicks. Two of them that are pretty important are Silas, who's the main character in my chapter in the book Unknown, and then Barnabas, who was Paul's previous sidekick. Now, Paul and Barnabas had a great start. It goes back to Acts chapter 13, the city of Antioch, the church of Antioch, where God calls and sets apart a number of gifted people to do the work of Christian missions. And Paul sets off with Barnabas, and there's another guy called John Mark. And we know him because he's the author of the book of Mark, most likely. From all the ancient sources, we believe Mark is same Mark in Acts is the one who wrote the book of Mark. Now, what happens, unfortunately, is that John Mark, for whatever reason, and it's a little bit of a mystery why, but Mark bails off the team in Acts chapter 13, verse 13. It says, "Now Paul and his companions set sail from Paphos and came to Perga in Pamphylia, but John Mark left them and returned to Jerusalem." So this guy, Mark, his other name is John Mark, he quits the team. And this is going to be a problem for Paul. Paul is not pleased about this. And later on in Acts chapter 15, him and Barnabas, they're going to slug it out, not physically, but they're going to have a big argument about this. The Bible calls it a sharp disagreement. So we can assume that there's real raw feelings involved here. And Barnabas is inclined to take John Mark back, forgive him, and to put him on the team again. Whereas Paul takes the hard line on this and really does not want to take Mark along with him anymore. Paul realizes that the mission can be very dangerous, that there's resistance and hostility. And we get the sense that Paul feels that Mark would be an anchor kind of dragging the mission team down. So what happens in the story is that Paul and Barnabas split ways, and Paul takes Silas, and Barnabas takes John Mark, and now the one mission team is split into two, which is good because now we have two teams going out to do missions. But it's a little bit unfortunate that Paul and Barnabas apparently couldn't mend their ways. One factor here that's a little bit of an X factor is that the book of Colossians tells us that Barnabas and John Mark are, get this, they're cousins. And so that would explain why Barnabas would be inclined to forgive him. This is a family situation for Barnabas. But Paul sees it more as like a business thing here, like, hey, man, you failed us once. I don't have time to mess around again, man. This is serious stuff. So both Barnabas and Paul are kind of right. Barnabas is right in the sense that we ought to forgive each other and give each other second chances. But Paul's right in the sense that the mission is too important sometimes to be weighed down by personal distractions. So they both have a real point. Now, Silas comes into the deal in the same chapter 15, because he becomes Paul's new mission partner. And I take it that Silas is kind of a tough, rough, able, competent, fearless man, the kind of person that would be perfect to be Paul's partner, because we get the sense that Paul's not going to waste time with people that may get flimsy kneed and peel off. So Silas is that perfect number two to Paul's number one, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And he's going to be a real asset to Paul as they go on their missions later on.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm thinking about it like this. So I'm going to say Paul probably forgave John Mark and probably forgave Barnabas, but just thought it wouldn't be a good idea to stick around, with the two in the mission field.
Yeah, and you know what? Let me just jump on that real quick, Brandon, if you don't mind, because we know Paul forgave Mark, because later on in 2 Timothy, which is Paul's last letter, he specifically asks that Mark would be able to come see him again. And the idea there is Paul knows he's probably going to die in prison or be executed, but he wants to see Mark, and he calls him like a faithful son, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And so the damage was not beyond repair, but it was a problem as far as their mission team lineup was set. So that's kind of the idea.
It's funny. I'm kind of hardline like that too, where you in it or you're not. And I don't have time. Yeah. It's funny because my sisters, they hound me for it. Why you don't have a girlfriend? And, tell them why. Oh, you're too hard. You're too hardline. You need to change your ways. You need to not do that. Don't be like that. And it's like, no, I don't have time for stupidity. You either in it or you're not. You either believe in God or you don't. Like, I don't have time for somebody that could potentially drag me back down to the 90s when I was a child, if you will, and growing up in the faith. Like, I'm surpassed that, and I want to remain, surpassed that. I want to grow more. And if I'm going to bring somebody in my life to share that with me, which is what Paul did, you want to be able to have that person be there so you can grow together. And I think that's the idea that Paul you might
have sided with like Paul and Silas then. You might have been on their team, whereas somebody who's maybe more tender, maybe more kid gloves, they might side with the Barnabas and John Mark side then in that case.
Yeah, I mean, I would still love them for who they are, but I don't think I could have them on my team,
Sure.
I'm a straightforward guy, and I think, we know Paul is. Paul don't hold no punches back. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, what are some similarities between Silas and Barnabas, and how would John Mark compare to both of them?
Great question. I love this question because even while Silas and Barnabas, maybe there could have been a little bit of rivalry there. Like, I was Paul's partner first. No, I'm his partner now. I don't get that sense that they held it against each other. Here we have two men, Barnabas and Silas, that both love Jesus. They're both fearless missionaries, and they're both willing to go. They're both willing to go on mission. So at the end of the day, they hold far more in common than they ever had in difference. If there was any difference between Barnabas and Silas, it was in that Silas made for a better partner to Paul than Barnabas did at the end of the day. Barnabas's name means son of encouragement, and everything we know about Barnabas is that he was a very loving, gentle, kind, gracious man that perfectly befits his name, son of encouragement. And Silas, probably just by personality, needed to be a little bit tougher to hang with Paul. Paul is just bent on getting the gospel to every city. He's willing to get stoned. He's willing to get shipwrecked. He's willing to get punched. He's willing to get snake bitten. He's willing to be persecuted and lied about. And it takes a pretty strong character to be able to hang with Paul. And it just looks like that Silas just has the right personality to stand next to him and to be with him when the chips are down.
Yeah, I agree. So, Matt, this idea of being a sidekick is probably not our first pick. Let's be honest. Mm-hmm. So, however, are you content with being someone's sidekick, or do you need to be the central position at all times? Now, this is a personal question for you, but I also want my listeners to think about this as well. You know, can you be a sidekick and be content with that, or do you have to be center of attention?
Great question. Great question. I think it depends on the context. Now, some of your listeners might relate to my personality. I tend to like to be in leadership. I find that leadership is where the action is. I'm kind of the person that likes to be involved. I tend to have an opinion on things, for better or for worse. I tend to like things to be done in, quote, the right way, unquote, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
So, I'm cut out of the cloth of leadership. However, there are certain people that I see that are so much more gifted than myself that when I'm around them, I am perfectly content to be their sidekick and just be, riding on their coattails. I remember one time I was on the mission field in Mexico working with a missionary named Todd, and his whole mission was building water wells for people where there was no water in the Yucatan Peninsula, just no rivers or streams or lakes, and he would build these wells. And he just knew the people, he knew the language, he knew the customs, he knew how to build the wells, he knew exactly what he was doing. And so when I was with him, I was perfectly content to just lift concrete bags and stones into the machine and make concrete all day and let him be in charge. Or when I'm with guys, there are theologians, writers, professors that are just so much smarter than me. I'd rather hide in their shadows and let them hash out some of the big arguments that I can't hang with.
That's kind of what I do.
But in the local church, I love what I do. I love to be a pastor and to preach and teach. So I kind of like a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think I do like to be in the shadows at times. And like I said, lately I've been pushed to the spotlight. And it's not because I'm seeking it. It's just I've had somebody tell me you're a leader and it needs to be shown. And I'm like, whatever. Like with in the last episode, I talked about Boy Scouts and how I was part of that key three. I was part of a team of 3 people that ran this camp. But what I didn't mention is I did a lot of the legwork behind the scenes to make sure that those 2 guys look good and that the camp looked good. And it backfired, if you will, because I ended up being the center of attention and it was something I wasn't even looking for, Yeah. But when you're dealing with scouts or with people that look up to older scouts, Eagle Scouts, you kind of get that. My nickname at camp is Nightcrawler. Oh, I want to be like Nightcrawler. He's cool. I want to work on staff with Nightcrawler and this, that, and the other. And it's like, okay, cool, whatever. It's fun, but I'm a mixture of an introvert and an extrovert. It may not seem like it, but I am. I can get my time where I need to be around people and be in the mix of doing things. And then there are probably more times than ever I need to be alone away from people. Like, don't talk to me, don't call me. I'm that kind of guy. But when it comes to being in the center at all times, I am completely fine with just riding the coattails. Like, for example, you had the Westminster Society going with the EPC for the longest time before you recently turned the reins over. I walked up to you and my comment to you was, this is too good of content to have such a crappy design.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said it like that.
No, it's awesome, man. I appreciate it. And I was thinking as you're talking that there's maybe there's a rule here, Brandon. Let me just throw something against the wall and see if it sticks.
All right.
I think it's probably okay for people to be sidekicks all the time because they have a personality that is just good in the gaps. They're the kind of person that they're almost like stagehands in a play where they wear the dark shirts and they don't get seen. But I would be more concerned with a person who has to be the leader all the time.
Right.
And I've known some people like that. And, you risk narcissism and egocentrism if you have to be the boss in everything. And, some of us have people like that in our lives and they're kind of annoying, aren't they? It's like, certainly somebody has some gifts that excel yours, right? I mean, if you can't admit that, that's a bit of a problem. So we should all be able to be a sidekick at some point, I would think.
Yes, one of my sergeants old sergeants just came to mind, and it's like, dude, like, chill out, okay? He would he would kick back my and I'm not saying I'm the best writer. I struggle with grammar just like everybody else, but I'm good at it. So he'll kick back one of my reports and tell me,